Hey everyone, Tom Butwin here for Premier Guitar. Today we're checking out two new offerings in the Squier Affinity Series. That's the Starcaster Deluxe and the Thinline Telecaster over my shoulder here. Before we dig into those, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss anything in the future. Now, of course, different versions of both of these guitars have been offered both by, obviously, Fender, as well as Squier in the past. These are in the Affinity Series, and they're appointed a little bit differently than some of the things that have been released in the past, and we're going to go over those today, and I'll share some of my thoughts with you on each one of these guitars. First of all, I do have the Starcaster in my hand, which is super cool. It's very unique and different. I think when it comes to Starcasters, just in general, the word different is probably the most accurate depiction of those. But right off the bat, you've got Strat headstock, two humbuckers, simple controls, volume, tone, three-way selector switch, two pneumatic style bridge, and a semi-hollow body with a solid center block. And that will probably remind you of some other guitars that have been out for quite a while. It's a popular body style. It gives you a really cool sound, not a lot of feedback because you do have that center block. But there are some things that distinguish a Starcaster from maybe those other guitars you're thinking about that have a semi-hollow center block with two F-hole type design. Namely, the first thing, and this is something I knew it about Starcasters, but for some reason it just took me a minute to just really register the fact that these are not set neck guitars. They are bolt-on neck guitars, as you would expect from Fender, because that's kind of what they do. But in general, when you see an arch top with F-holes and a semi-hollow or hollow type thing, you're not thinking bolt-on neck. So whether you like that or you don't, that's up to you. I think it works really well in this case because it gives you kind of this like hybrid sort of sound. I mean, it definitely changes the sound when it's not a set neck, so you get kind of a more snappy type vibe to it, but obviously there are advantages to a more modular type guitar. Fender does that very well. You can swap this neck a lot easier than you could swap a set neck guitar. If there's a repair that has to be made, you could do that. You know, there are things that are good when it comes to a bolt-on neck. Of course, if that's not your thing, then maybe you find something else to play. So speaking of the neck, this is something that I really liked when I picked up this guitar. Now, by no means is there anything wrong with the neck on the Thinline over my shoulder, which we will get to in just a moment, so make sure you stick around for that. But if we're going to compare the two, and it's tough to compare these two guitars because they are very different, obviously. I mean, yes, they share some of that semi-hollow nature, but beyond that and beyond being, inspired by Fender guitars, they really are departures from one another. But if I were to compare the two, the neck on this guitar, it feels great. It's really, really a nice satin finish. The fretwork is really, really nice. I like the fret size they chose on here. I don't know exactly what it would measure out to be, which wire, but it's cool. I like it a lot. It's substantial. And the other neat thing they've done here is, the fingerboard is obviously the satin, but if you look at the headstock, they do have that gloss finish on just the front of the headstock, which is cool. It actually kind of offsets the gloss in the body in a nice way. So the neck, though, I think is really the highlight of this guitar. The way it feels is really, really a positive for the guitar in general. in my opinion. So lastly with the Starcaster, before we move over to the Thinline Tele, and it kind of applies to both guitars actually, one of the really cool things about, I mean most guitars, but Fender guitars and Fender inspired Squier guitars in particular is that, these are more on the entry level spectrum of price ranges when it comes to guitars, but they are hugely upgradable, which is cool. You can upgrade all sorts of things on these guitars in a relatively easy way because they still are that Fender modular design. So if you want to get some new tuners, new pickups, upgrade switching, strap buttons, you've got a really nice solid platform to start with, and a unique one at that. It's not just a regular old solid body Strat or Tele body. It's a really cool Starcaster semi-hollow body, and you can kind of get this, into something that's really, really cool. If the way it comes from the factory is not exactly what you want, you can definitely make some upgrades to both of these guitars. So next, it's the Tele Thinline from the Squier Affinity Series. And this is another kind of entry-level approach to a very unique and interesting style guitar. It's not your typical bolt-on solid body Telecaster. It is also a semi-hollow guitar, as you would expect with the name Thinline on it. Beyond that, you've got that cool Thinline pickguard, typical Tele pickup arrangement with the three-way selector switch, volume and tone. And on this particular offering, you get the 6-saddle bridge. So I don't want to compare these two guitars directly to one another because it's not really something you would do. They're very, very different animals, and they're very different tools for applications. You wouldn't necessarily fill the same role with the Starcaster with the humbuckers as you would with the Thinline Tele with the two single coils. Very cool guitars to have if you want both of them, but they're not necessarily going to fill the same space in your guitar arsenal, so it's tough to compare them. But I have picked them up one after the other. So I'm only human, and the thing that I notice is that I actually prefer the feel of the neck on the Starcaster. I don't know if that's just because the satin finish feels a little bit different on that one. The fret sizes are different. They're much more substantial on the Starcaster than they are here on the Thinline Tele. Just what I would prefer, I think, is on the Starcaster. And it feels, both the fretwork is good. It's good. It's basically what you would expect at this price point. Certainly some things that could be smoothed out by a luthier, but out of the box, it's very playable, very comfortable. It's not going to be something really like, oh man, I can't play this. It's definitely good. Like I said, I think I like the Starcaster neck better, but that's just how it is. When you pick up a guitar, at least for me, the neck is like the first thing that I notice and it kind of sticks into my head. And it's tough to shake that if you prefer one versus the other, even though I'm not really comparing the two guitars. Speaking of the neck on this, very similar approach to the Starcaster. You do have the satin finish on the neck and the fingerboard, and then on the headstock, you get that gloss, which is cool because, again, it pairs well, I think, with the glossy sunburst finish on the guitar itself. And again, the neat thing about, Fender guitars in general, it's the neat thing about them, but these particular guitars, they are great platforms for upgrades, and they're a good starting point because, and they are unique, and I think that's why it's really cool that they're the entry-level versions of unique guitars, because they aren't necessarily for everybody. A Thinline Telecaster or a Starcaster isn't for everyone. Maybe you're curious about it. That's where these guitars come in, is for a pretty low-risk proposition at their price point. You can start to experiment and see if a guitar like this or the Starcaster fits into what you do as a player, whatever that may be, whether you're a professional musician who's gigging and you say, hey, I might want something like the Starcaster, let me see if I like it. Or if you're just learning and you don't want to go with your typical solid body Strat Telecaster type thing that, so many people pick up as their first guitar, even from Squier in the Affinity Series. These offer you something a little bit more unique. And honestly, if this is what excites you, the semi-hollow, the look, the sound of this or the Starcaster, I think that's a huge selling point, because being excited to play the guitar is a huge part of it. Being excited to look at it and want to pick it up is a big part of learning. and a big part of being consistent and staying with it. I mean, that doesn't go away when you become an intermediate or professional player. So there you go. That's the Starcaster Deluxe and the Telecaster Thinline from the Squier Affinity Series. Again, these are both guitars that are very unique in their own ways, and I think Squier offering them at the price point that they are is really cool because you can try them out, you can test out to see if something that's definitely on the more unique side in both of these guitars is for you without having to sink a ton of money into it. And if you really like it, you can always upgrade things on these guitars if you really want to. So definitely a strong point when it comes to basically any Squier guitar. I wish that I had a Squier as my first guitar. I did not have a Squier. I had some mystery brand, but at the time, those mystery brands were not making guitars nearly as nice as these Squier guitars. So manufacturing has come a long way, especially in the entry level field, and Squier is taking advantage of that on these guitars. Like I said, there are things I prefer on one versus the other, but they're not really meant to be compared. The best thing to do is grab one of these and check it out for yourself. There will be links in the description of this video below if you want to do just that. Until then, make sure you keep playing, stay inspired, and I will see you in the next video.